Are humans dualistic two-part beings composed of a material body plus an immaterial soul? The reason some have this idea is the belief that matter cannot be organized to think, and therefore the thinking ability of humans must be attributed to something immaterial. This is then used as a basis for the belief in the soul's natural immortality. If it's immaterial, it has no parts, so it can't be destroyed and must endure forever. Now, while that might seem to make sense, it depends on the idea that the mind is immaterial, and the apparent necessity for that vanishes if matter can be organized to think. In our study today, we're going to continue looking at a pamphlet written by SDA pioneer D.M. Canright called Matter and Spirit, which was taken from his earlier series of articles called Can God Organize Matter to Think?, published in the Signs of the Times by James White. In our last episode, we looked at Canright's answer to the question, can matter be organized to think? As we saw, he goes through arguments and evidence which establish that different organizations of matter enable it to have different qualities and abilities. Building on this, he then shows that thinking is one of those abilities that matter can have when organized in the right way. Obviously, if the organized matter that is our brain can think, there's no reason to attribute our ability to think to something else, like an immaterial aspect of our nature. If you want to hear more about this in more detail, you can find a link to our last study in the description. Now let's look at a second set of arguments Canright made in regard to the premise that humans have an immaterial part of them that is responsible for thought. These arguments point out the difficulties involved in coming up with a coherent conception of this supposed immaterial part of humans. On one hand, people claim this part is immaterial, but then, when attempting to say specific things about this immaterial part, they often end up saying things that would logically imply that it is material after all. For example, Canright says, quote, "Is not the spirit located in the body? Certainly. Well, whatever has locality must have extension, must have a center and circumference, and hence must be material." Close quote. D.M. Canright, Matter and Spirit, page 16, paragraph 1. So the one who contends that there's an immaterial spirit inside a person's body actually ascribes location to the spirit by that very belief. Canright points out that this necessarily implies extension and shape, and hence must be material. For something to have location requires that it is a body occupying space. Why? Well, because a thing's location is the space it occupies. So anything with location must have extension through space. It must have length, width, and height, and thus volume. In other words, it has three-dimensional size. And of course, anything that occupies space must occupy it in some sort of shape. This in turn implies that it has internal structure, since that's what gives something its shape. Consider, why is a hand shaped like a hand? Well, because of its internal structure, the arrangement of its parts, the bones, the muscles, the ligaments, etc. And obviously, a hand is just an example, but everything with shape has parts arranged in a way to give it its shape. And whatever has parts is also divisible, since parts can be taken apart or moved in relation to each other. There's more that could be said, but the main point is that granting something location logically requires that it is a body occupying space with size and shape, parts, etc. In short, it's material. Next, Canright addresses a claim put forward by some immaterialists that the soul is the same size and shape of the body. Most people probably don't give it this much thought. But if you claim the soul has location in the body, it does raise the question of which part or parts of the body. One option would, of course, be that it occupies the whole body. To this idea, Canright wrote, quote, "It is claimed that the immaterial soul is of the same size and shape as the body, and hence it is present in all parts of the body, and that it is after all the soul that feels and not the flesh. But this theory will not work well for our opponents. According to this view, the immaterial soul of a child can only be the size of a child. Hence it must grow larger as the child grows to man's size. But how can an immaterial thing grow? That which can grow larger must be composed of parts. Hence it can be divided, separated, and thus destroyed, and therefore it's not immortal any more than the material body." Close quote, page 32.2. Now, once you understand the basic attributes of matter, extension, size, location, shape, parts, etc., it's quite obvious that this theory logically implies that the soul is material, even though it claims it's immaterial. It's helpful when this is made obvious, but keep in mind what we just saw from the previous example. If you grant that something has location, this logically requires that it's material. And this requirement is just as much enforced when the size and shape aren't specified as when they are. Now, the last thing Canright said, and what we just quoted from, is that if you say there's an immaterial aspect to humans, but then make claims for it that logically imply it's material, you can't argue that it's immortal by nature any more than something material is. If it has parts, it's just as subject to destruction as anything material is, and so one couldn't argue that it's naturally immortal. After recognizing that attributing any attribute of materiality to something logically demands that it's material, some attempt to be more consistent by avoiding claiming anything like location, size, etc. to supposed immaterial realities. Let's take a moment to consider what sort of thing that would be. Something that's truly immaterial. It would occupy no space. So it would have no length, width, or height, and no volume. This means that it wouldn't be big or small. It would have absolutely no size at all. And since it would occupy no space, it obviously wouldn't have location, which is to say it would be nowhere. It also wouldn't have any shape. It would have no parts, and hence wouldn't be divisible. Since it has no arrangement or relations of parts, it also couldn't undergo any change, which matches the description that is often claimed of immateriality, that it's beyond the bounds of time and space. But what is something that takes up no space, is nowhere, has no size, shape, or structure, and isn't in any moment of time, past, present, or future? This description in reality is a clear definition of non-existence. This is the problem with immateriality. If you try to describe it in terms of reality, you end up talking about materiality, not immateriality. But if you actually regard it as immateriality, it's precisely the same thing as non-existence. So the idea that immateriality exists really just cannot be made sense of. Canright makes this point too. He says, quote, "What must be the shape of this immaterial spirit? Is it round, flat, square, oblong, or three-cornered? But probably it has no shape, for if it has shape, it must be material. What then is the size of the spirit? Is it as large as a horse or as small as a flea? But size is a property of matter, and therefore the spirit has no size at all. It's neither big nor little." What nonsense. And those last two paragraphs were from pages 56 and 57. So again, Canright's saying that if we're going to attribute any properties to the immaterial spirit, then it's not immaterial by definition. But what if we are being truly immaterial? Canright asks, what has no shape? What has no size? If we negate any of the properties of matter, we're negating everything, as we showed. And as we said, the definition of non-existence is also the negation of everything, right? Canright is saying that if we're going to say that an immaterial spirit has no size or shape, then we're describing non-existence. As he said, what nonsense. Interestingly, the early SDA pioneers were unitedly against the idea of the existence of immateriality. And these arguments from Canright here show exactly why they thought this. For the pioneers, it wasn't just that Scripture is opposed to the idea of an immaterial soul, but reason, logic, and empirical evidence also forbid its existence. We'll link to a collection of pioneer statements on this fact in the description, in addition to the entirety of the pamphlet Matter and Spirit by Canright, and we'll also link to other studies that go into the idea of immateriality a little more fully. Thank you for staying with us to the end. We invite you to visit our website, www.bdsda.com, to learn more about who we are, and just as important, who we're not. Please join us as we continue to offer new and interesting insights for your Sabbath School studies. And if you want to keep up with our new studies as they're published, we recommend subscribing. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on plenty of other podcast apps. Links for subscribing are in the description. From Ed and me, many blessings.